I am Rebecca, 34 years old, and my husband planted a bag of illegal contraband in my suitcase, hoping to lock me away in a foreign prison. So I slipped it into his mistress's luggage instead. When the airport security alarms went off, he lost his mind on the spot. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic partner. For the past 5 years, I played the part of a struggling freelance consultant. I dressed simply, kept my head down, and let my husband Donovan believe he was the sole provider. I was a 36-year-old vice president at a major real estate investment trust, a man whose ego entered the room before he did. What Donovan did not know was that my freelance gig was a cover. I am a high-level corporate crisis manager operating under a strict non-disclosure agreement. I investigate financial fraud, untangle corporate espionage, and destroy white-collar criminals for a living. Donovan thought I was terrible with numbers. He constantly reminded me of it. The blaring sound of the TSA security alarm at John F. Kennedy International Airport pierced through the chaotic terminal. Red lights flashed above the conveyor belt at lane 4. The security line ground to a sudden, agonizing halt. I stood just past the metal detector, sliding my shoes back on with practiced calmness. 5 steps away, Donovan stood holding his expensive leather briefcase. A smug, victorious grin played on his lips. I was watching my gray suitcase slide down the rollers toward the secondary search area. I was waiting for my downfall. He was waiting for the moment armed guards would slam me against the stainless steel table and drag me away in handcuffs. He had been planning this for weeks. This trip to Cancun was supposed to be his company retreat, a luxurious corporate getaway where executives brought their spouses to mingle over overpriced margaritas. But Donovan had a different itinerary. Last night, while he thought I was sleeping, I watched through the reflection of our bedroom mirror as he slipped a heavy black zip bag into the lining of my luggage. He hid it inside my blue makeup bag. I knew immediately what he was doing. My crisis management instincts kicked in. I did not scream or confront him. Instead, I waited until he went downstairs to pour his evening scotch. I retrieved the black bag, discovering it was packed with a stolen crypto hardware wallet and a significant amount of synthetic narcotics designed to trigger international trafficking charges. I took that black bag and quietly transferred it into the oversized designer carry-on belonging to Amber, his 26-year-old secretary. Amber was flying with us today. She was standing 2 people behind Donovan in the security line, chewing gum and scrolling through her phone. She thought she was untouchable. She flaunted her inappropriate relationship with my husband right in front of me, constantly reminding me how indispensable she was to him. Now, as the TSA agents swarmed the area, Donovan shifted his weight, his eyes glued to my gray suitcase. And we need to inspect your bag," a stern TSA officer announced. Donovan's smirk widened. He took a step away from me, preparing to play the shocked, devastated husband who had no idea his wife was an international smuggler. I stepped forward, my voice perfectly steady. "Of course, officer. Go right ahead." The agent unzipped my suitcase. He dug through my neatly folded dresses, my shoes, my toiletries. He checked the lining. He scanned the compartments. Nothing. The agent zipped it back up and nodded. "You are good to go, ma'am. Have a safe flight." Donovan froze. The color instantly drained from his face. His smug grin collapsed into an expression of sheer, unadulterated panic. He stared at my suitcase, then stared at me, his eyes wide with frantic confusion. He patted his pockets. He looked around wildly. Then the alarm shrieked again, louder this time. The TSA agent pointed directly at the designer carry-on moving through the scanner. "Whose bag is this?" Amber rolled her eyes, popping her gum. "It is mine. Is there a problem?" "Step out of line, miss," the officer commanded. 2 more armed guards materialized from the back room. They pulled Amber's bag onto the metal table and unzipped it. Right on top, nestled between her expensive perfumes and silk scarves, was the heavy black zip bag. The officer opened it, revealing the hardware wallet and the clear plastic bags of white powder. Amber gasped, her jaw dropping open. "What is that?" "That is not mine. I swear I have never seen that before." Donovan looked like he was going to vomit. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He stumbled toward me, grabbing my upper arm with a bruising grip. He leaned in, his breath hot against my ear. "You are always so clumsy, Rebecca," he hissed, his voice trembling with terror and rage. "Where is your blue makeup bag?" I looked up at him, letting a soft, innocent smile touch my lips. I pulled my arm out of his grasp and smoothed my sweater. "I forgot it at home," I whispered back. "You know how clumsy I am, Donovan. I always ruin everything." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, his chest heaving. He knew I knew. And he knew his entire plan, his freedom, his stolen millions had just gone up in smoke. "Donovan!" Amber shrieked, struggling as the TSA agents grabbed her arms. "Donovan, tell them. Tell them it is not mine. Help me." Donovan did not move. He could not defend her without incriminating himself. He stood paralyzed as the armed guards forced his mistress to the ground, snapping heavy metal handcuffs around her wrists. She sobbed hysterically, screaming his name over and over as they dragged her away through the terminal doors. I picked up my gray suitcase, the wheels gliding smoothly over the polished floor. "Shall we head to the gate, darling?" I asked, my voice light and cheerful. We would not want to miss our flight. Donovan followed me in absolute silence, a broken, terrified man. The game had changed, and he was no longer the one making the rules. The flight to Cancun was a masterclass in suffocating silence. Donovan sat rigidly beside me in first class, refusing to touch his complimentary champagne. His knuckles were white from gripping the armrests, and his eyes darted constantly toward the airplane door, as if expecting the federal authorities to board mid-flight and rip him out of his seat. I spent the journey calmly reviewing financial reports on my laptop, enjoying the turbulence that made him flinch. I knew he was running numbers in his head, panicking about the lost crypto hardware wallet that was now sitting in an evidence locker in New York. That wallet contained millions in embezzled company funds, and without it, he was walking blindly into a corporate retreat where his bosses would expect results. When we finally landed and arrived at the grand entrance of the luxury beachfront resort, the humid Mexican air felt heavy and oppressive. The corporate retreat was in full swing. Executives in linen suits mingled near the infinity pool, but my attention was immediately drawn to the lavish lobby couches. Sitting there looking entirely out of place in their aggressive resort wear were my parents-in-law, Brenda and Gordon. Donovan had insisted on paying for their trip, claiming it was a reward for their support. In reality, it was a display of dominance, a way to surround himself with his loyal enablers. As soon as we approached the marble reception desk, Brenda stood up, her lips pursed in a familiar expression of deep dissatisfaction. She marched toward us, her heavy gold jewelry clinking with every aggressive step. Gordon trailed behind her, his face locked in a permanent scowl. "Where is Amber?" Brenda demanded, not even bothering to greet me. She looked right past me, her eyes scanning the entrance. "Donovan told us Amber was handling our spa reservations and our dinner itineraries. We have been waiting in this lobby for 45 minutes like commoners." Donovan swallowed hard, tugging at the collar of his expensive shirt. "There was a minor complication at the airport, Mom. Amber will not be joining us for the retreat. She was detained." "Detained?" Gordon barked, crossing his arms. "What do you mean, detained? How is Donovan supposed to function without his secretary? He has a massive presentation for the chief executive officer tomorrow." Brenda finally turned her sharp gaze on me, her eyes narrowing with undisguised contempt. "This is exactly what I was talking about, Gordon." She pointed a manicured finger at my chest. "Look at her. She is absolutely useless. If you were a proper wife, Rebecca, you would be managing Donovan's schedule. You would be organizing these events. Instead, you just stand there leeching off my son's hard-earned money, while his actual assistant is the one keeping his career afloat. You are a burden. A heavy, clumsy burden." I looked at Brenda, my expression carefully blank. I was intimately familiar with her financial abuse. For years, she had weaponized her son's income against me, demanding expensive gifts and lavish vacations, while simultaneously treating me like a beggar who had infiltrated her precious bloodline. She constantly praised Amber, fully aware of the inappropriate boundaries between her son and his secretary, simply because Amber stroked her ego and brought her designer handbags paid for by Donovan's corporate card. "Donovan needs a woman who can handle the pressure." Brenda continued, her voice rising to ensure the nearby corporate colleagues could hear. Amber is a professional. She actually works for a living. What do you do, Rebecca? Type on your little laptop and pretend to be a consultant. It is embarrassing. Donovan is carrying you financially, and you cannot even manage a simple hotel check-in. I smiled warmly at her. You are absolutely right, Brenda. I am just a simple freelancer. I really do not understand the complexities of Donovan's finances, or how Amber manages his special luggage. It is all far beyond my capabilities. Donovan flinched as if I had struck him. He grabbed my elbow, his grip tight and desperate. That is enough, he snapped at his mother, though his voice lacked its usual authority. We are going to our suite, now. He dragged me away from the lobby, ignoring his parents' indignant protests. We rode the glass elevator to the penthouse level in silence. The moment the heavy mahogany door of our suite clicked shut behind us, Donovan's fragile composure completely shattered. He threw his briefcase across the room. It smashed into a decorative vase, sending glass shattering across the pristine hardwood floor. He spun around, his face flushed purple, his chest heaving with explosive rage. He stormed toward me, backing me into the corner near the sliding glass balcony doors. Do not play innocent with me, he roared, spit flying from his lips. I know what you did. You set her up. You set me up. I kept my posture relaxed, looking up at him with wide, unbothered eyes. I simply packed my bags, Donovan, just like you asked me to. He slammed both hands against the wall on either side of my head, trapping me. He was breathing heavily, the stench of fear radiating from his pores. You listened to me very carefully, you worthless parasite. He sneered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, shaking whisper. Amber is sitting in a federal holding cell. They are going to set her bail at a massive number because of the international trafficking charges, and you are going to pay it. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. Me? Why would I pay for your secretary's legal troubles? Because you are going to drain your pathetic personal savings account, he demanded, spittle hitting my cheek. Every single penny you have hoarded from your stupid little freelance jobs. You are going to wire it to my lawyer immediately to cover her bail. If she talks to the federal agents, if she tells them about my accounts, I am ruined. And if I go down, you go down. I will leave you with nothing. I will throw you out on the street. You will empty your account today, Rebecca, or I swear to God you will never see the inside of our house again. I stared into his desperate, bloodshot eyes. He really believed he still had power over me. He really believed I was the weak, financially dependent wife he had spent a decade molding. He had no idea that I already had the access codes to his hidden offshore accounts, or that I was about to dismantle his entire existence dollar by stolen dollar. I stared into Donovan's bloodshot eyes. He panted, expecting me to crumble. For 5 long years, I had perfected the art of the submissive wife. I would normally lower my gaze and scramble to fix his messes. Not today. I shoved his chest, catching him off guard. He stumbled, his loafers slipping on the hardwood floor. I am not paying for your mistress, I said, my voice dropping. If Amber is in a federal holding cell for smuggling corporate property and narcotics, that is a problem for her public defender. Not me. Donovan's jaw dropped open. The illusion of my compliance was fracturing in front of his face. He recovered quickly, replacing shock with a vicious sneer. He stepped toward me, pointing a trembling finger at my face. You will do what I tell you, he growled. Your money is my money. I will drag you to the bank myself and force the wire transfer. Try it, I replied. Drag me through the resort lobby. Let the executive see the vice president assaulting his wife to bail out his secretary. Let the chief executive officer watch. The heavy mahogany door of our suite burst open. Trevor stomped inside. Donovan's older brother was a louder, more arrogant version of my husband. Trevor had always viewed me as a parasite who tricked his brother into marriage. He kicked broken glass out of his way as he marched in. What is taking so long? Trevor barked. Mom is having a panic attack in the lobby. People are asking where Amber is. Get your wife in line, Donovan. We need that bail money wired before the feds dig into Amber's personal life. Trevor turned his aggressive focus entirely on me. He used his massive frame to block my path to the door. He loomed over me, his chest puffed out in toxic intimidation. Listen to me very carefully, Trevor sneered, pointing a thick finger at my collarbone. This family has carried your dead weight for years. You live in a house my brother pays for. You eat food he buys. You wear clothes he affords you. Right now, Donovan has a crisis, and you are going to be an obedient wife and fix it. You will empty your savings account, wire the money to his lawyer, and keep your mouth shut. Do you understand me? Take your finger out of her face, Trevor. The voice was sharp, cold, and sliced through the tense air of the suite. We all turned toward the entryway. Jada stood there looking immaculate in a tailored white jumpsuit that contrasted beautifully with her dark skin. My sister-in-law possessed actual intelligence and unshakable integrity. She walked into the room with the deliberate grace of a predator assessing its prey. Trevor kept his aggressive stance, though his confidence faltered. Stay out of this, Jada. This is family business. Rebecca needs to learn her proper place. Jada let out a dry, humorless laugh. She walked directly up to her husband, completely unfazed by his size or temper. She inserted herself smoothly between Trevor and me, forcing him to take a step back. Let me ensure I understand this family business correctly, Jada said with lethal sarcasm. She turned her piercing gaze to Donovan. Your secretary gets busted by federal agents at the airport with a bag full of synthetic drugs. And your first instinct is to violently corner your legally wedded wife in a hotel room and force her to empty her personal bank account to bail out the mistress. Donovan drained of color. Jada, you do not understand the situation. Amber is a vital employee. Amber is a drug mule you were sleeping with, Jada snapped, silencing him. Do not insult me, and do not ever let me catch you threatening your wife again. Jada turned back to her husband, her eyes narrowing with absolute disgust. As for you, Trevor, you are standing here acting like a cheap mob enforcer to protect your brother's side piece. It is pathetic. Why is this entire family forcing a wife to bail out her husband's secretary for drug trafficking? What exactly are you two terrified that Amber is going to tell the feds? Trevor opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer truth left him floundering for words. He looked at Donovan, who was staring at the floor, sweating profusely under the pressure. The brothers were completely humiliated, dismantled by a few sentences of basic logic. We are leaving, Jada commanded, grabbing Trevor's arm tightly. You are going down to the lobby to calm your mother. And Donovan, you are going to figure out your own mess without touching a single dime of Rebecca's money. Trevor gritted his teeth but allowed Jada to pull him away. He knew better than to cross her when she was this angry. As they reached the doorway, Jada paused. She turned back to look at me, her expression shifting to something much more calculated. She walked back toward me, pretending to check my shoulder where Trevor had cornered me. Are you okay? She asked loudly for the brothers to hear. As she spoke, she reached out and smoothly slid a small folded piece of paper into the palm of my hand. I curled my fingers around it instantly, keeping my face perfectly neutral. I am fine, I replied, holding her fierce gaze. Jada gave me a meaningful nod before turning and marching her husband out of the suite. Donovan followed seconds later, cursing under his breath as he frantically dialed his lawyer, leaving me entirely alone. I stood in the silence, my heart hammering. I slowly unfolded the paper. Written on the back of a valet receipt in Jada's handwriting was a Cayman Islands routing number. Beside it was an access code. My hidden professional instincts recognized the exact format. Jada had just handed me the precise coordinates to the offshore accounts she had found hidden in Trevor's home office. The real war had just begun. The real war had just begun. I locked the deadbolt and slid the security chain into place. I needed absolute isolation. Donovan was downstairs at the resort bar, undoubtedly guzzling expensive scotch, while attempting to salvage his fractured reality and manage his hysterical mother. He thought I was sitting up here trembling, calculating how to drain my pathetic freelance savings to rescue his mistress. You are so clumsy, Rebecca. His favorite insult echoed in the quiet room. You are a burden. The words he used to chain me to his ego now served as the ultimate adrenaline. I did not cry. I did not panic. I walked directly to my luggage, the same luggage he had violated hours ago, and pulled out my encrypted laptop. This was the tool of my actual trade. While Donovan played real estate mogul, I dismantled corporate empires. I sat at the glass desk overlooking the turquoise waters of Cancun, cracked my knuckles, and unfolded the valet receipt Jada had slipped me. A Cayman Islands routing number and a 12-digit alphanumeric access code stared back at me. It was time to show my husband exactly how clumsy I could be when handling millions of dollars. I launched my secure virtual private network, routing my connection through 3 separate international servers before bridging into the offshore banking portal. You do not understand finance, Rebecca. Just let me handle the numbers. The phantom sound of his condescension fueled the rapid clicking of my keyboard. He genuinely believed his sloppy digital footprint was invisible to me. I entered the routing sequence Jada provided. A secondary biometric firewall blocked the path. Donovan was arrogant, but he was also predictable. He reused password architecture across his personal devices. I ran a decryption script I had built specifically for corporate audits, layering his known passwords against the offshore bank's security protocol. It took less than 4 minutes. The firewall crumbled. The account dashboard materialized on my screen, glowing with a harsh white light in the dim hotel room. I bypassed the transaction history and went straight to the ledger balance. The number sitting in that hidden account made the breath catch in my throat. $4.2 million. My eyes darted across the transfer logs. These were not bonuses. These were not savvy real estate flips. I recognized the originating shell companies immediately. High had been systematically bleeding his own real estate investment trust dry for over 18 months, every time he claimed to be working late to secure a massive commercial acquisition. He was actually rerouting corporate capital through dummy corporations straight into this Cayman vault. But the money was only half the horror. I dug deeper into the encrypted communications attached to the account manager profile. I found a string of messages between Donovan and a secure email address I instantly identified as belonging to Amber. You are nothing without me. Just a heavy, clumsy burden. The psychological conditioning he inflicted on me was never just about ego. It was a calculated legal defense. The emails laid out a horrifying, meticulous trap. Donovan and Amber had orchestrated the entire airport scenario. They had intentionally placed the stolen crypto hardware wallet containing the master keys to the missing $4 million into my blue makeup bag. The synthetic narcotics were the insurance policy. The plan was terrifyingly simple. They intended to tip off the Mexican border authorities the moment we landed in Cancun. I would be arrested for international drug trafficking. While I rotted in a foreign prison unable to defend myself, Donovan would return to New York as the devastated, betrayed husband. He would file for divorce, claiming I was a rogue criminal who had secretly hacked his corporate accounts and stolen the money to fund a secret life. He was going to let me take the fall for federal wire fraud and embezzlement, leaving me completely destroyed while he and his secretary disappeared with the cash. You are a burden, Rebecca. He needed me to be the burden so he could throw me overboard. The sheer sociopathy of his plan was breathtaking. I kept scrolling through the attached financial disclosures, needing to understand the full scope of his collateral damage. That is when I found the collateral documents. The initial capital he used to start the laundering process had to come from somewhere before he could access the corporate funds. I opened a PDF titled Initial Equity. My blood ran cold. Brenda and Gordon, the same parents-in-law who spent the last decade treating me like a worthless parasite, were listed as the primary guarantors. Donovan had not just taken their money. He had secretly remortgaged their entire retirement estate, forging their signatures to secure a high-risk predatory loan to cover his first bad investment. He had gambled their home, their pension, their entire livelihood, and lost it. Brenda had stood in the lobby today, shouting about how I leached off her son's hard-earned money. She had absolutely no idea that her golden child had already rendered her completely bankrupt and effectively homeless. The arrogance was staggering. He had burned down his company, his parents, and intended to burn me all to walk away clean with a woman who ended up getting caught by her own hubris. I highlighted the entire directory of offshore accounts, the forged mortgage documents, and the email chains outlining the drug setup. With a few rapid keystrokes, I initiated a secure file transfer, copying every single piece of evidence to my remote encrypted servers. The data synced, locking his criminal empire into my absolute control. I closed the offshore portal and cleared my tracks, leaving no trace that anyone breached the account. You are so clumsy, Rebecca. I smiled at the screen, letting the words empower me. The download completion notification flashed green across my display. At that exact second, the heavy brass handle of the penthouse suite door clicked, and the solid door began to slowly swing open. I smoothly closed the laptop, letting the screen go black, just as Donovan stepped into the room. He did not look like the terrified, sweating coward who had cornered me an hour ago. The panic that had practically choked him at the airport was completely gone. In its place was a sickening, arrogant swagger. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive linen shirt and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, looking at me with absolute disdain. He walked over to the minibar, poured himself a fresh glass of scotch, and took a long, deliberate sip. The ice clinked against the crystal glass, the sound echoing in the tense silence of our suite. He walked toward me, his chest puffed out, radiating a toxic superiority. I handled it, he announced, his voice dripping with condescension. Amber is out. The federal authorities released her pending further investigation. She is boarding a direct flight to Cancun right now and will be joining me at the resort tonight. I kept my face perfectly neutral, though my mind was racing. How exactly did you manage that, Donovan? I asked, keeping my tone light. A federal trafficking charge usually requires a massive cash bond. You told me your personal accounts were tied up. He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. I used company emergency funds. I am a vice president, Rebecca. I have discretionary access to capital that a simple freelancer like you could not even comprehend. I wired the money through a corporate retainer account. The board trusts me completely. They will never question a temporary withdrawal for a critical employee. I stared at him, suppressing the urge to smile. He had actually done it. He had compounded his massive embezzlement by directly stealing from the company's emergency liquid assets to bail out his mistress. He was handing me the final nail for his own coffin. He thought he was flexing his corporate power, but he had just provided the exact paper trail I needed to trigger an immediate, undeniable internal audit by the chief executive officer. Donovan reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thick folded manila envelope. He tossed it onto the glass desk right next to my closed laptop. It landed with a heavy thud. What is this? I asked, looking at the envelope. Your exit strategy, he sneered. Those are divorce papers. My legal team drew them up weeks ago, just waiting for the right moment. I have already signed them. You are going to sign them right now. I looked down at the documents. I did not need to read the fine print to know what they contained. He had orchestrated everything to ensure I walked away destitute. Let me guess, I said calmly. I get nothing. No alimony, no share of the house, no access to the retirement accounts. You get exactly what you brought into this marriage, Rebecca. Nothing, he replied, taking another sip of his scotch. I even had my lawyers include a strict confidentiality clause. You will sign away your right to contest the asset division. You are going to sign those papers, pack your cheap bags, and take a commercial flight back to New York tonight. You will vacate my house by the end of the week. If you try to fight me in court, I will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt. My firm has lawyers on retainer who eat freelance consultants like you for breakfast. He leaned over the desk, invading my personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. You really thought you could play games with me at the airport? He shook his head, a patronizing smile twisting his features. You are so clumsy, Rebecca. You are a burden. You have always been a heavy, clumsy burden dragging me down. I am a highly successful executive and you are just a pathetic liability. You do not understand how the real world works. You do not understand money. You are nothing without me. He pointed to the envelope. Sign it and walk away before you embarrass yourself any further. If you make a scene, my parents are waiting in the lobby to ensure security escorts you off the premises. Trevor is ready to block all your credit cards. You have no allies here. You are completely alone. Just sign the papers, take your little freelance computer, and disappear. I looked at the heavy gold pen he placed on top of the envelope. He had planned this speech for months. He had probably practiced it in the mirror, imagining the tears streaming down my face, envisioning me begging him to stay, pleading for another chance. He expected me to shatter. He needed me to shatter to validate his own inflated ego. His entire existence relied on breaking me down so he could feel tall. I stared at his smug face, noticing the slight twitch in his jaw. For all his bravado, he was still terrified underneath. He needed me gone before the corporate retreat officially kicked off tomorrow. He needed the narrative clean. The crazy, jealous wife had a mental breakdown and flew home, leaving the dedicated executive to push through his personal tragedy and lead the company. It was a perfectly constructed fiction built on a foundation of absolute garbage. I thought about Brenda and Gordon downstairs waiting like loyal guard dogs to witness my expulsion. They had probably helped him pack those very divorce papers, celebrating the moment they could finally rid their wealthy son of his useless wife. I thought about Trevor standing by to execute his brother's financial bullying, eager to assert his own warped sense of dominance. They all believed they held the winning hand. They all believed I was the weak link in their powerful family chain. They had no idea I held the master key to their entire financial ruin. Donovan tapped the desk impatiently. I do not have all day, Rebecca. The pre-dinner cocktail hour starts soon and I need to greet my colleagues. Sign the damn paper. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy gold pen. Donovan's smirk widened into a full victorious grin. He took a step back, crossing his arms over his chest, ready to watch my final surrender. He expected me to uncap the pen weep over the signature line and hand over my life. Instead, I gripped the pen tightly in my right hand. I did not uncap it. I did not look at the signature line. I locked my eyes directly onto his, letting the mask of the submissive, clumsy wife dissolve completely. The cold, calculated focus of a corporate crisis manager took over my features. I raised my hand and brought the pen down with explosive, brutal force. The sharp metal tip pierced straight through the thick stack of divorce papers, driving deep into the soft wood underneath the glass overlay of the desk. The loud, violent crack echoed through the luxury suite. Donovan jumped back, his scotch spilling over his fingers. His victorious grin vanished, replaced by sudden shock. I left the pen standing upright, pinning his ridiculous exit strategy to the table. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer with slow, deliberate precision. I picked up my laptop and tucked it securely under my arm. I am not leaving. Leaving, I said, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying authority. I have a corporate dinner to attend. Donovan stared at the gold pen buried deep in the mahogany wood. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The absolute certainty in my voice had paralyzed him. He took a step back, his eyes darting from the ruined divorce papers to my calm face. Without a single word, he turned and cowardly fled the luxurious penthouse suite, slamming the heavy door behind him. He needed an audience who still believed his lies, and the corporate cocktail hour was waiting. I took my time getting ready. I chose a pristine white silk dress, a garment that projected elegance and unbothered confidence. I secured my laptop in the room safe, knowing my traps were set. When I walked out of the elevator and stepped onto the open-air terrace of the resort, the evening was in full swing. Executives in tailored suits and their wives mingled under the warm glow of string lights. A mariachi band played softly in the background, masking the toxic reality of the people gathered around the open bar. I spotted my in-laws immediately. Brenda and Gordon hovered near the entrance of the terrace, their necks craning toward the lobby. Trevor stood beside them, swirling a glass of bourbon, while Jada stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, watching the family dynamic with absolute disgust. A dramatic gasp echoed across the patio. Amber had arrived. She walked onto the terrace looking like a tragic heroine. She wore a tight black dress, entirely inappropriate for a corporate function, her makeup carefully smudged to suggest she had been weeping. She dragged a designer suitcase behind her, playing the part of the traumatized victim to perfection. The moment Brenda saw her, she sprinted across the terrace. "Oh, you poor brave girl!" Brenda cried out, throwing her arms around the secretary. She shot a venomous glare in my direction, making sure her voice carried. "Thank goodness you are here. Donovan has been absolutely lost without you. We were all so worried about the unjustified ordeal you had to endure at the airport." Gordon rushed forward to take her suitcase, patting Amber on the shoulder. Trevor handed her a glass of champagne, nodding sympathetically. They formed a protective barrier around the mistress, deliberately ignoring my presence. They were openly treating the woman sleeping with their son as the guest of honor, while the wife stood 20 feet away. Amber soaked up the attention, dabbing at her dry eyes with a cocktail napkin. She leaned into Brenda's embrace, casting fearful, victimized glances in my direction. Donovan emerged from the crowd, rushing to Amber's side. He placed a hand on her lower back, a gesture far too intimate for a boss and his assistant. The executives politely averted their eyes, but everyone knew exactly what was happening. Amber looked up at him, a triumphant smirk flashing across her face before she buried it back in Brenda's shoulder. She felt invincible. She had survived the border authorities, secured her millionaire boyfriend, and won the approval of his parents. Eventually, the crowd began to shift toward the dining pavilion. Amber detached herself from my in-laws and made a beeline straight for me. She held a full glass of red wine in her right hand. Her hips swayed with arrogant confidence. She was ready to deliver her final blow, convinced that the divorce papers had already broken me. "Well, if it is not this soon-to-be ex-wife," Amber said loudly, stopping inches from me. She tilted her head, looking me up and down with exaggerated pity. "I am surprised you are still here, Rebecca. I thought Donovan told you to pack your cheap bags and go home." I did not move. I just looked at her, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "It is a corporate dinner, Amber. I am a wife supporting her husband. What exactly are you supporting tonight?" Amber's eyes narrowed. Her facade of the traumatized victim vanished, replaced by concentrated malice. She took a step closer, invading my personal space. With a flick of her wrist, she tipped her glass forward. The dark red wine splashed directly onto the center of my white silk dress, blooming like a jagged wound across the fabric. "Oh my gosh, I am so incredibly clumsy!" Amber gasped loudly, drawing the attention of nearby executives. As the guests turned to look, she leaned in close, her lips brushing against my ear. Her voice dropped to a vicious whisper. "You are done, Rebecca," she hissed. "We are taking the house. We are taking the accounts. We are taking absolutely everything you have. By the time Donovan's lawyers are finished with you, you will not even have enough money to buy a new dress. Go cry in your room while I take your place at the head table." She pulled back, her face stretched into a malicious grin, waiting for me to burst into tears and flee the terrace in humiliation. I looked down at the ruined silk. I reached into my clutch, pulled out a handkerchief, and calmly dabbed at the red stain. I did not scream. I did not flinch. I returned her smile with a warm, terrifyingly polite expression. I took one step forward, forcing her to hold her ground, and lowered my voice so only she could hear. "Are you absolutely sure Donovan did not use your name on those offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands?" "Amber," I whispered smoothly. "The access codes suggest a secondary authorized user. Because when the federal agents trace that missing $4 million, they usually look at the secretary first." The smug, victorious grin on Amber's face froze instantly. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a sickening shade of gray. Her mouth parted slightly, but she could not draw the breath to speak. She stared at me, her eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated horror, as the cold, crushing reality of my words slammed violently into her chest, shattering her world. Amber stood frozen like a statue carved out of panic. Before she could gasp for air to formulate a lie, Brenda clapped her hands from across the terrace, signaling that the private dining pavilion was open for seating. Amber stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her designer heels. I gave her one last warm smile and walked past her toward the grand dining area. The pavilion was a masterpiece of coastal luxury, draped in white orchids and illuminated by crystal chandeliers hanging from the exposed wooden beams. The ocean breeze blew gently through the open arches, carrying the scent of roasted garlic and sea salt. Donovan took his place at the head of our family table, which was strategically positioned right next to the executive board members. He wanted his bosses to see him as the patriarch. Brenda and Gordon sat to his right, while Trevor and Jada took the seats across from me. Amber slid into the chair next to Brenda, her hands shaking so badly she had to hide them under the white linen tablecloth. She refused to make eye contact with anyone. Donovan did not notice his mistress suffocating on her own terror. He was too busy performing for the corporate crowd. Waiter Donovan snapped his fingers, an arrogant gesture that made Jada visibly cringe and shake her head. "Bring us 3 bottles of your vintage Bordeaux, the $1,000 ones. Tonight is a celebration of excellence." He puffed out his chest, looking toward the adjacent executive table to ensure they heard his expensive order. He wanted to project the image of a man possessing unlimited wealth and power. Gordon raised his water glass. To my son, a vice president who actually knows how to lead a company into the future. Brenda beamed, reaching out to pat Donovan's hand lovingly. And to Amber, who works so tirelessly to support him. She is the real backbone of his operation. Donovan smirked and turned his predatory gaze toward me. See, Rebecca, this is how the real business world operates. You reward high performance with high value. It is a concept you might struggle to grasp with your little freelance consulting gig. You just do not have the mindset for high-stakes pressure. Trevor let out a loud, barking laugh, adjusting his silk tie. Honestly, Rebecca, I do not know how you fill your days. Playing on your laptop while my brother pays the mortgage must get exhausting. You should take notes from Amber on how to be a productive member of society. Jada cut her steak with cold surgical precision. Trevor, the only thing exhausting here is listening to you pretend you understand hard work while you run sketchy shell companies. Trevor's face flushed with intense anger, but he kept his mouth shut, terrified of his brilliant wife. The waiter returned carrying a silver tray. He leaned down and whispered discreetly to Donovan. Donovan frowned, pulling a sleek black credit card from his leather wallet and tossing it onto the tray. Just run it again. The chip reader is probably faulty. Do not bother me with technical issues. The conversation around the table resumed, but I kept my eyes locked on Donovan. 5 minutes later, the waiter reappeared. He looked highly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from side to side under the heavy scrutiny of our table. Sir, I apologize, but the card has been declined by your financial institution. Donovan's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He noticed a few executives from the next table glancing over. That is impossible, he hissed, trying to keep his voice down to preserve his image. It is a black card with no limit. Your machine is broken. Run this one. He pulled out a platinum rewards card and slapped it aggressively into the waiter's hand. The waiter hurried away. Brenda huffed, fanning herself with a dessert menu. The incompetence of the staff here is absolutely staggering. Donovan, you must complain to the resort manager tomorrow morning. They should be treating you like royalty. The waiter returned faster this time. Declined, sir. Donovan snatched the card back, his hands shaking with sudden violent anger. He pulled out a debit card tied to his primary checking account. Run this. Now. The waiter vanished and reappeared moments later. Declined. Donovan pulled out a fourth card, a joint account card. This one. Declined. Donovan stood up, his heavy wooden chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. The sharp noise drew the attention of the entire dining pavilion. What kind of scam are you running here? He yelled at the terrified waiter. Do you know who I am? Do you know how much money is in those accounts? I could buy this entire resort and fire you on the spot. Trevor stood up to back his brother. Get your manager right now. The humiliation was spreading across Donovan's face as the corporate executives began whispering among themselves. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he opened his banking app to prove his immense wealth to the waiter. He stared at the screen. He refreshed the app. He refreshed it again. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His accounts were not just empty, they were locked tightly. A bright red banner reading "Account suspended pending fraud investigation" blared across his screen. He tapped the screen frantically, but absolutely nothing changed. His financial lifeline was entirely severed in front of his bosses. I picked up my water goblet. The condensation felt cool against my fingers. I took a slow sip, savoring the absolute chaos erupting around me. I set the glass down, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the tablecloth. Oh, Donovan, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through his escalating panic. I tilted my head, offering him the sweetest, most innocent smile I could muster. You know how clumsy I am. I accidentally reported all our joint and primary accounts for fraud an hour ago. The absolute silence that followed my confession was heavy enough to crush bone. Donovan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked down at the declined cards scattered across the silver tray, then back at my perfectly calm face. The veins in his neck bulged, pulsing with a sudden violent surge of adrenaline. You did what? Donovan roared, his voice cracking like a whip across the luxurious dining pavilion. He slammed both of his fists onto the white linen tablecloth, rattling the expensive crystal glasses and causing Amber to flinch violently in her seat. I kept my hands resting elegantly in my lap. I called the fraud department, I repeated, enunciating every single syllable for the benefit of the executives sitting at the adjacent table. I simply told the bank representatives that I noticed some highly suspicious offshore transfer activities originating from your devices. Given the massive amounts of capital moving into Cayman Islands' routing numbers, the bank agreed with me. They locked everything down to protect us. You are welcome, darling. Are you out of your mind? Trevor shouted, leaping up from his chair. He pointed a thick, accusing finger at my face. His features twisted into a mask of pure misogynistic rage. You stupid, vindictive woman. Do you have any idea what you just did? You are embarrassing this family in front of the entire corporate board. Gordon immediately joined the assault, tossing his cloth napkin onto his plate with profound disgust. This is exactly why we told you not to marry her, Donovan. Gordon barked, his voice laced with decades of unchecked entitlement. She is a hysterical, jealous liability. You freeze my son's accounts over a technical glitch. You do not have the intellectual capacity to understand high-level corporate finance. You are going to call the bank right now and reverse this before you ruin his promotion. Brenda gasped, clutching her pearl necklace, as if the very concept of a frozen bank account was a personal attack on her soul. Fix it, Rebecca. Fix it this instant. You are making Donovan look like a common beggar in front of his peers. I did not reach for my phone. I simply let them scream, absorbing their toxic panic. They were so busy trying to protect Donovan's fragile ego that they completely ignored the very illegal financial implications of my exact words. But Jada did not ignore it. Jada leaned back in her chair, swirling her glass of sparkling water. She looked around the table with cold, piercing amusement. She deliberately raised her voice, ensuring that the chief executive officer and the senior board members at the next table could hear every single word she was about to say. I am a little confused, Jada announced, her sharp tone instantly cutting through Trevor and Gordon's shouting. If Donovan is simply an innocent, highly successful vice president, why would a standard fraud alert freeze his entire financial portfolio? It makes absolutely no sense. A man of his supposed immense wealth should have diversified assets. Unless, of course, the bank actually found the offshore routing numbers Rebecca mentioned. Trevor turned on his wife, his face flushing dark red. Shut your mouth, Jada. This is not your business. It absolutely is my business when I am sitting at a table with a man who apparently cannot pay for his own dinner. Jada shot back, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. She looked directly at Donovan, who was practically hyperventilating. Tell me, Donovan, why did the bank flag your accounts? What exactly are you currently hiding? What kind of high-level corporate finance involves wiring millions to the Cayman Islands on a Tuesday afternoon? And why is your secretary sitting here shaking like a leaf instead of fixing it? The silence that rippled from the adjacent table was palpable. The executives had stopped eating. The clinking of silverware vanished. The chief executive officer, a ruthless man who demanded absolute financial transparency from his subordinates, was staring directly at the back of Donovan's head. Jada had just planted a massive, undeniable seed of doubt right in the fertile soil of corporate paranoia. Donovan realized the absolute disaster. The executives were listening. He could feel his career evaporating into thin air. Panic overrode his logic. He lunged forward, grabbing my upper arm with a bruising, desperate grip. He yanked me out of my chair so forcefully that my knees slammed against the heavy wooden table. "We are going to have a private conversation," Donovan hissed through gritted teeth, his fingers digging into my skin. "Now." He did not wait for my response. He dragged me away from the dining table, pulling me roughly through the arched entryway of the pavilion and out onto a dimly lit garden pathway. The distant sounds of the mariachi band were completely drowned out by the harsh, ragged sound of his breathing. He shoved me against the rough stucco wall of the resort, pinning me in the shadows. "You listen to me, you worthless parasite." Donovan spat, his face inches from mine. "You are going to march back into that restaurant, and you are going to tell my bosses that you had a mental breakdown. You are going to tell them you made up the offshore accounts because you are a jealous, crazy woman." "And why would I do that?" I calmly asked. "Because if you do not, I am going to call the local Mexican police right now. I will tell them you assaulted me and stole my wallet to freeze my accounts. You are in a foreign country, Rebecca. You will rot in a foreign prison. Fix this, or I destroy you." He stepped back, crossing his arms, waiting for me to collapse. I reached into the pocket of my white silk dress and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen. The crisp audio of the threat he just delivered echoed loudly. "I accidentally recorded your entire extortion attempt, Donovan." Donovan stared at the glowing screen of my smartphone, his face twisting from absolute rage into stark, paralyzed terror. The playback of his own voice threatening to frame me in a foreign country echoed in the humid night air. I locked the screen and slid the device back into the pocket of my ruined silk dress. "You are out of moves," I whispered, stepping away from the rough stucco wall. "If you try to call the police, I hand this audio directly to the local authorities and your corporate board. Enjoy the rest of your evening." I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving him gasping for air in the shadows. I did not return to the penthouse suite. Instead, I navigated the winding resort pathways until I reached the east wing. I knocked twice on a solid mahogany door. Jada opened it immediately. She took one look at the red wine stain on my dress and the steely expression on my face and stepped aside to let me in. "Trevor is downstairs drinking with your awful father-in-law," Jada said, locking the deadbolt behind me. She walked over to the minibar and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. "I assume the frozen accounts were your doing." I accepted the glass and sat on the edge of the plush sofa. "It was just the beginning," I replied. Jada sat in the armchair opposite me. She crossed her legs, looking at me with profound respect. "This entire family has treated you like a clueless doormat for 10 years. It is about time someone showed them how easily glass houses shatter." I opened my laptop, the soft glow illuminating the dark suite. "I am not just shattering the glass, Jada. I am grinding it into dust." While Donovan was busy scrambling downstairs, I initiated a secondary protocol. Months ago, he demanded I set up the family sharing plan on our digital devices because he was too lazy to do it himself. He always said technology was a burden and forced me to manage his device ecosystem. That burden gave me administrative access to his smartwatch. I tapped a sequence of keys, activating a cloned connection. A low static hum filled the room, followed by the distinct sound of a heavy door slamming shut. It was the audio feed from the microphone on Donovan's wrist. Jada leaned forward, her eyes widening with fierce anticipation. The audio was crystal clear. Donovan had retreated to the penthouse suite and Amber was with him. The sound of rapid, panicked pacing echoed through the computer speakers. "What do you mean you cannot access the money?" Amber shrieked, her voice pitched high with hysteria. "You told me the offshore accounts were untouchable. You told me we were walking away with $4 million. Donovan let out a frantic, ragged breath. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "The accounts are there, but I cannot authenticate the transfers. The hardware wallet is gone. It was in that black zip bag at the airport. When the border agents seized your carry-on, they confiscated the physical decryption key. I cannot move a single cent out of the Caymans without that piece of hardware." The sound of shattering glass erupted through the feed. Amber had apparently thrown something against the wall in a fit of absolute rage. "You promised me a massive payout!" she screamed, completely dropping the facade of the devoted, loving secretary. "I risked federal trafficking charges for you. I smuggled that bag through security because you said it was safer with me. I want my cut, Donovan. I want my money right now, or I am going straight to the board tomorrow morning and telling them exactly where the missing company funds went." Jada raised an eyebrow, quietly sipping her water. "There is no honor among thieves," she whispered. On the audio feed, Donovan scrambled to contain his spiraling mistress. "Are you insane?" he snarled. "If you expose me, you expose yourself. You are listed on the internal transfer ledgers. We are in this together." "I do not care," Amber yelled back, her tone vicious and demanding. "You dragged me into this mess. Your accounts are frozen. Your wife is running around the resort ruining everything. You are a complete failure. Figure it out or I burn you to the ground." The desperate sound of Donovan trying to calm his breathing filtered through the smartwatch microphone. He was trapped, cornered by his own greed and the sheer incompetence of his partner in crime. He paced across the room again, the heavy footsteps vibrating through the small speaker. "Amber, you need to calm down and listen to me." Donovan pleaded, his voice taking on that slick, manipulative tone he usually reserved for me whenever he needed to gaslight me into submission. "We are not done. We just need a scapegoat, and we have the perfect one right here. The hardware wallet is gone, but the digital trail can be altered. We just need to divert their attention long enough to secure new capital and drain the offshore accounts manually." Amber sniffled loudly, completely unimpressed by his sudden burst of false confidence. "So what?" she snapped bitterly. "How does that help us right now?" The chief executive officer called an emergency board meeting for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. "He is going to demand answers about the audit. He is going to fire you. He is going to promote me," Donovan corrected, his voice dripping with delusional arrogance as he paced across the expensive hotel room floor tonight. "I have already drafted a falsified internal audit report that shifts the blame entirely onto my useless wife. Do not worry. The CEO arrives tomorrow morning, and I am framing Rebecca for the missing funds during the board meeting. I will present forged documents proving she orchestrated the whole thing from her laptop. She is too stupid to defend herself. She will take the fall for our crimes now." I ended the cloned connection, cutting off the audio feed abruptly. The sudden silence in the suite felt thick and heavy. Jada sat across from me, her posture rigid, her eyes burning with a quiet, lethal fury. She set her sparkling water down on the glass table with a deliberate, sharp click. "He is going to use you as a human shield," Jada stated, her voice devoid of any surprise. "He is going to sacrifice his wife to save his own skin, and this entire family will applaud him for it. They will say you ruined him, Rebecca. They will spin the narrative until you look like the villain." I leaned back against the sofa, crossing my arms. "Let them try," I replied, my tone icy. "He thinks he can outsmart a crisis manager with a fake audit report. He is bringing a water gun to a nuclear war. But there is a missing piece, Jada. Donovan is arrogant, but he is not a financial genius. Moving $4 million without tripping the internal corporate alarms requires a sophisticated laundering network. He could not have set up those Cayman accounts entirely on his own. He needed someone on the outside, someone who already knew how to wash corporate capital through dummy corporations." Jada did not blink. She stood up, walking toward the sliding glass doors that opened onto the balcony. The humid night air spilled into the room, carrying the faint sound of the crashing ocean waves. "I know," she said softly, staring out into the darkness. She turned back to face me, her expression resolute. "Trevor is the money launderer." I froze, absorbing the magnitude of her confession. "Your husband is helping him wash the stolen funds." Jada nodded, her jaw tight. "Trevor has been running shell companies out of Delaware for years. He uses his consulting firm as a front to clean dirty money for executives who think they are untouchable. I have suspected it for a while, but I finally found the proof last week when I broke into his locked home office." She walked over to her designer handbag resting on the console table and pulled out a small encrypted flash drive. She held it up, the metal glinting in the dim light. "I have everything, Rebecca. Every encrypted communication between Trevor and Donovan, every fake invoice, every single transfer log connecting your husband's embezzlement to my husband's laundering operation." She walked across the room and placed the flash drive directly into the palm of my hand. Her fingers lingered for a second, a silent transfer of power. "Why are you giving this to me, Jada?" I asked, looking down at the drive. "If I take this to the board tomorrow, Trevor goes down with Donovan. You are handing me the weapon to destroy your own marriage." Jada let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. "My marriage has been destroyed for a long time, Rebecca. I am suffocating in this family. Brenda and Gordon raised two narcissistic, entitled monsters who believe the rules do not apply to them. They protect their golden boys at all costs, crushing anyone who gets in their way. Trevor looks at me the exact same way Donovan looks at you. Like I am an accessory, a burden, a piece of property to be managed. I am done playing the supportive wife to a criminal. I am ready to burn the whole forest down to stop this generational toxicity." I closed my fingers around the flash drive, feeling the weight of her trust. I respect that, I said firmly. We end this tomorrow. Jada smiled a fierce, genuine expression of solidarity. I will have the divorce papers ready before the federal agents even finish reading Trevor his rights. Make sure you wear something spectacular to the boardroom tomorrow, Rebecca. You are going to be the main event. I spent the next several hours integrating the data from Jada's flash drive into my master presentation. The puzzle was completely solved. The offshore accounts, the forged mortgage documents, the airport drug setup, and the Delaware shell companies all linked together in a flawless, undeniable chain of evidence. I formatted the slides with the ruthless precision of a corporate executioner. Donovan's falsified audit report would look like a child's finger painting compared to the comprehensive digital autopsy I had prepared. I did not sleep. I sat by the window watching the pitch-black sky slowly turn a bruised purple, then a vibrant burning orange as dawn broke over the Cancun horizon. The resort began to stir with the quiet activity of the groundskeepers and early morning staff. I showered, changed into a sharp-tailored navy blue power suit, and pulled my hair back into a sleek, unforgiving style. I looked in the mirror entirely, shedding the persona of the clumsy, dependent wife. Today I was the predator. A loud, rhythmic thumping noise shattered the morning calm. The sound grew louder, vibrating through the thick glass windows of the suite. I stepped out onto the balcony, looking up toward the sky. A sleek black corporate helicopter descended rapidly, hovering over the resort's private landing pad. The downdraft whipped the palm trees into a frenzy. The helicopter touched down, and the side door slid open. Mr. Carmichael, the ruthless, notoriously aggressive CEO of the Real Estate Investment Trust, stepped out onto the tarmac. He did not look like a man arriving for a corporate retreat. He looked furious. He marched toward the main resort building, flanked by two serious-looking men carrying heavy briefcases. The emergency board meeting was imminent, and the executioner had just arrived. I turned away from the balcony glass, the deafening roar of the helicopter blades fading as Mr. Carmichael entered the building. My pulse was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat against my ribs. I slipped Jada's encrypted flash drive into the interior pocket of my navy blue blazer, right beside my own meticulously organized evidence files. Today was the day Donovan's entire universe collapsed, and I was going to be the architect of his absolute ruin. I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back was not the submissive, clumsy wife who kept her head down for 5 years. She was a weapon. I walked out of the suite and took the glass elevator down to the main level. The atmosphere in the grand lobby was incredibly tense. Resort staff scrambled to accommodate the sudden arrival of the chief executive officer, polishing surfaces and fetching coffee carafes. I stepped off the elevator and headed purposefully toward the East Wing, where the VIP boardrooms were located. I barely made it 10 paces across the imported marble floor before two figures moved aggressively into my path, physically blocking my way. Brenda and Gordon stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces twisted with identical expressions of arrogant hostility. Gordon crossed his arms over his chest, his jaw locked tight while Brenda glared at me, profound contempt. "Where exactly do you think you are going?" Brenda demanded, her voice sharp and loud enough to draw the attention of a nearby bellhop. "You are supposed to be upstairs packing your cheap luggage. Donovan told us you are leaving this morning." I stopped looking at my in-laws with absolute calm. "I am not going to the airport, Brenda. I have a very important meeting to attend." Gordon let out a harsh, barking laugh. "A meeting? You are a freelance consultant who barely makes minimum wage. You do not have meetings, Rebecca. You are a dependent. My son has a massive presentation with Mr. Carmichael in 20 minutes, and you are going to get out of his way before you ruin his career." Brenda stepped closer, invading my personal space, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You are nothing but a clumsy burden, Rebecca. You caused a massive scene at dinner last night. You embarrassed this entire family in front of Donovan's corporate colleagues. We will not allow you to jeopardize his promotion today. You are going to turn around, go back to your room, pack your things, and take the first commercial flight out of Mexico. If you refuse, Gordon will personally call the resort security and have you physically dragged off the property for trespassing." I did not flinch. I just stared at her, marveling at her blind, staggering ignorance. She was aggressively defending the very son who had secretly remortgaged her retirement estate and gambled away her entire financial future. You really should worry less about my travel arrangements and more about your own pension, Gordon. I replied, my tone perfectly even. You might need it sooner than you think. Gordon's face flushed a deep, furious red. How dare you speak to me about my finances? My son is a highly successful vice president. He takes care of this family. You are just a jealous, bitter woman who cannot handle being married to a man who outshines you in every conceivable way. Before I could respond, the sharp, rapid clicking of designer heels echoed across the marble floor. Amber strutted into the lobby looking entirely out of place in a tight, inappropriate corporate pencil skirt and a low-cut silk blouse. She was carrying two thick leather binders, stamped with the Real Estate Investment Trust logo. She marched right up to our tense circle, her chin raised high, radiating toxic superiority. She had completely recovered from her panic attack the night before. Donovan had clearly convinced her that his forged audit report would save them both. She looked at me and let out a dramatic theatrical sigh. I cannot believe you are still here, Rebecca, Amber sneered, shaking her head. You really have zero self-respect, do you? Brenda immediately turned to the secretary, her hostile expression melting into a warm, welcoming smile. Amber, sweetie, do not worry. Gordon is just about to call security to have her removed, so she does not bother Donovan before the big presentation. Oh, you do not need to call security, Brenda Amber said, her voice dripping with malicious glee. Donovan just got off the phone with the board of directors. He informed them about the missing corporate funds. He told them everything. Brenda gasped, her eyes going wide. Missing funds. Amber turned her vicious gaze back to me, smiling like a predator who had just cornered its prey. Yes. Donovan presented preliminary evidence showing that his wife used her freelance computer access to hack his corporate accounts. He told the chief executive officer that you orchestrated a massive financial breach. They are investigating you for corporate espionage, Rebecca. Gordon crossed his arms, looking at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. I always knew you were a criminal. You leeched off my son for years, and now you try to steal from his company. You are a complete disgrace to this family. Amber leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, making sure she delivered the final devastating blow. Donovan told the board that you planted those drugs in my carry-on at the airport to distract the authorities while you transferred the stolen money. The federal agents are already waiting for you at the border. You are not just getting divorced, Rebecca. You are going to federal prison. Now get out of my way. I have to go assist Donovan. I needs a real woman by his side when he saves the company. Amber shoved past my shoulder intentionally, bumping into me as she strutted down the hallway toward the VIP boardroom. She practically vibrated with triumphant arrogance. Brenda and Gordon watched her go, nodding with profound approval. You heard her, Brenda spat, turning her venom back on me. You are a thief and a liar. My son is a saint for dealing with your dead weight for this long. Now turn around and walk out those front doors before I call the local police myself. I stood entirely motionless in the center of the grand lobby. I absorbed their insults, their threats, and their profound, laughable stupidity. They had handed me every single piece of ammunition I needed. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not defend myself. I simply checked the silver watch on my left wrist. It was exactly 8:55 in the morning. The emergency board meeting was set to begin in 5 minutes. I looked at Brenda and Gordon, offering them a chilling, razor-sharp smile. Enjoy the lobby, I whispered. I did not turn toward the exit. I did not pack my bags. Instead, I adjusted the lapels of my navy blue blazer, squared my shoulders, and walked with absolute terrifying purpose in the exact opposite direction, heading straight down the polished marble corridor toward the VIP boardroom. The heavy oak doors of the VIP boardroom loomed at the end of the marble corridor. Two broad-shouldered security guards in dark suits stood on either side, hands resting over the earpieces curled around their necks. Through the polished wood, Donovan's arrogant voice echoed into the hallway. I slowed my pace to catch my breath, fingers lightly grazing my navy blue blazer where Jada's encrypted flash drive sat securely. I stopped near the entrance, listening intently. Donovan was in the middle of his presentation, projecting the exact fake authoritative confidence he used to belittle me at dinner. As you can see on slide 4. Gentlemen, a highly sophisticated breach compromised our primary operational accounts. Donovan announced, his tone dripping with manufactured concern. The origin of the intrusion was not an internal failure of our real estate investment trust security protocols. The breach originated from an unsecured secondary residential network, specifically my home network. A murmur rippled through the boardroom. I could perfectly picture the executives leaning forward in their chairs, frowning at the projected data. I took another step closer, my jaw locking tight. My wife Rebecca operates a small freelance consulting business from our shared home office. Donovan continued, his voice adopting a sickeningly patronizing edge. She is regrettably incredibly clumsy with digital security. She regularly bypasses basic firewall protections to download unauthorized software for her little projects. I have warned her countless times that she is a massive liability. Unfortunately, hackers exploited her severely compromised computer to bypass our residential router and piggyback onto my executive credentials. That is how the unauthorized actors bypassed our corporate perimeter and funneled the $4 million into untraceable offshore accounts. She handed them the keys to the vault. Amber chimed in, her voice pitched with eagerness. I have the network access logs right here, Mr. Carmichael. As Mr. Donovan explained, the initial ping came directly from Rebecca's registered IP address. It is a tragic domestic oversight, but Mr. Donovan caught the discrepancy early this morning and immediately moved to isolate the remaining corporate funds. He acted with absolute heroism to save the company from his wife's incompetence. I stood outside the doors, letting their pathetic fabricated narrative wash over me. The sheer audacity of his plan was almost impressive in its desperation. I was sitting in a room full of apex predators, using fabricated spreadsheets to blame his massive, highly orchestrated embezzlement scheme on his supposedly clueless freelancing wife. He genuinely thought he had won. He believed that by destroying my name, he would walk out of that room with a promotion and 4 million stolen dollars. It was time to wake him up. I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The two security guards immediately stepped together, physically blocking the heavy oak doors. "Excuse me, miss," the guard on the left said, holding up a massive hand. "This is a private corporate meeting. No unauthorized personnel are allowed beyond this point." I did not back down. I looked the guard directly in the eye, my posture projecting absolute, unyielding authority. "I am highly authorized," I replied, my voice cool and commanding. "Open the doors." The guard frowned, reaching for the radio on his lapel. Before he could speak into it, I reached out, grabbed the polished brass handles of the double doors, and pushed them open with violent, explosive force. The heavy oak swung inward, hitting the interior walls with a loud, resounding thud. The entire boardroom fell deathly silent. 15 high-level executives in tailored suits snapped their heads toward the entrance. At the head of the massive mahogany table sat Mr. Carmichael. The chief executive officer was a formidable gray-haired man with eyes like chipped ice. He stared at me, his expression completely unreadable. Standing at the front of the room, laser pointer in hand, was Donovan. His face went instantly pale. Amber sat to his right, her hands freezing over her laptop keyboard. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. The security guards rushed into the room behind me, reaching out to grab my arms. "Sir, we apologize," the guard barked toward Mr. Carmichael. She forced her way in. "We will remove her from the premises immediately." Donovan recovered from his initial shock, his chest puffing out with arrogant indignation. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Rebecca?" he shouted, slamming his laser pointer onto the table. "Have you completely lost your mind? You cannot just barge into a private executive meeting because you are throwing a childish tantrum." He turned to the security guards, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Get this hysterical woman out of here right now. She is trespassing. My parents warned me she was having a mental breakdown." The guards stepped forward, their hands gripping my shoulders. I did not struggle. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the chief executive officer sitting at the head of the table. Mr. Carmichael slowly raised a single commanding hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of absolute corporate sovereignty. "Let her go," Mr. Carmichael ordered, his voice deep and gravelly, cutting through Donovan's frantic shouting. The security guards instantly dropped their hands and took a respectful step backward. Donovan stared at his boss, completely bewildered. "Mr. Carmichael, you do not understand," Donovan stammered, offering a nervous, placating smile. "This is my wife, Rebecca. She is very unwell. She is trespassing and disrupting an emergency corporate briefing. I will handle her outside so we can continue discussing how to recover the stolen capital." Mr. Carmichael leaned back in his heavy leather chair. He folded his hands together, resting them on the mahogany table, and fixed Donovan with a stare that could freeze boiling water. "She is not trespassing, Donovan," Mr. Carmichael stated, his tone dripping with lethal precision. "Gentlemen, meet the external crisis consultant the board hired 6 months ago to investigate missing funds." The silence in the boardroom became a vacuum. 15 executives stared at me, their expressions shifting from irritation to shock. Donovan stood paralyzed at the head of the mahogany table. The laser pointer slipped from his fingers and clattered against the wood. He looked as though the floor had vanished beneath his feet. Amber stopped, drawing breath. Her hands gripped the edges of the table fiercely. She looked frantically between Mr. Carmichael and me, failing to process her impending destruction. I walked forward with the measured grace of a woman holding the executioner's axe. My blue blazer felt like armor. Every step I took across the plush carpet signaled the end of Donovan's reign. I reached the podium smoothly, disconnecting his laptop from the projector cord. I set his computer aside and placed my own encrypted device onto the stand. The digital screen behind Donovan flickered, replacing his falsified audit report with my corporate seal, the logo of my crisis management firm, which the real estate investment trust had quietly retained 6 months prior, illuminated the room in sharp definition. Donovan found a fraction of his voice. "Mr. Carmichael, this is a terrible joke," Donovan stammered, his tone pitching upward into a pathetic whine. "She is my wife. She sits at home in her pajamas. She does not know anything about complex corporate structures. She is having a psychotic break. You cannot believe her." Mr. Carmichael did not even bother to look at him. The chief executive officer leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and fixed his icy gaze entirely on the projection screen. "Proceed with your findings, Rebecca." Mr. Carmichael commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. I tapped the spacebar. The first slide materialized. It was a brutal scan of the Cayman Islands banking portal. The screen displayed the exact offshore routing numbers, the biometric firewall entry logs, and the unmistakable access code. Directly below the banking credentials, a bold red graphic highlighted the current ledger balance, $4.2 million. A collective gasp echoed around the mahogany table. Several senior board members leaned forward abruptly, pulling their reading glasses from their tailored breast pockets in absolute disbelief. "As you can clearly see, gentlemen," I began, projecting crisp authority. "The missing capital was not siphoned by an anonymous hacking syndicate. It was manually diverted through an internal authorization channel, specifically the access credentials belonging to your Vice President of Acquisitions. Over the past 18 months, Donovan systematically bled your primary operational accounts dry. I utilized a network of Delaware-based shell companies to launder the stolen capital before parking it permanently in this offshore vault." Donovan gripped the edge of the wooden podium, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Rebecca, please stop," he hissed under his breath, begging me like a terrified child. I ignored his whimpering and tapped the keyboard. The slide transitioned instantly. This time, the screen displayed a comprehensive side-by-side comparison. On the left side were the official corporate transaction ledgers. On the right side were the encrypted email communications I had extracted from the offshore profile. The emails clearly detailed Donovan actively authorizing the massive wire transfers, and listed right below his digital signature was the secondary authorized user profile. I turned my cold gaze toward the terrified woman sitting at the table. "Amber," I said, my tone echoing with lethal precision, "would you care to explain to the board of directors why your personal email address and secondary authentication credentials are listed on the Cayman Islands account, holding $4 million of stolen company money. Amber pushed her chair back, the wood screeching harshly against the floor. She stood up abruptly, her entire body shaking uncontrollably under the crushing weight of exposure. "I do not know anything about that," she cried out, her voice shrill, breathless, and intensely desperate. "He did it. Donovan did all of it. He told me to sign some standard paperwork for a blind trust. I am just a secretary. I am completely innocent." I smiled warmly at her spectacular flailing panic. Innocent is a remarkably strong word, Amber. I tapped the keyboard for the final time. The bright screen shifted to the most damning, inescapable evidence of all. Massive screenshots of the text messages exchanged between Donovan and Amber over the past 3 weeks filled the display. The messages were brutally explicit, leaving absolutely nothing to the imagination. "Let us thoroughly review your innocence," I announced to the boardroom. This text exchange outlines a highly coordinated, fully premeditated federal felony. In these specific messages, Donovan and Amber meticulously planned to frame me for their own financial crimes. They openly discussed securing a stolen crypto hardware wallet containing the master keys to the offshore accounts. They discussed packing that wallet alongside a significant quantity of synthetic narcotics. The executives stared at the screen in absolute horrified fascination as they read the damning words for themselves. Their strategy was stunningly simple. I continued pacing slowly across the front of the room. They planted the contraband in my luggage, intending to trigger an international trafficking arrest at the border. Donovan planned to let me rot in a Mexican federal prison. He intended to stand before this board, present a falsified audit report, blaming his incarcerated wife for the financial breach, secure a promotion, and then flee the country with his mistress and your money. I turned my back to the board and walked up to Donovan. He was physically shaking, tears of terror pooling in his wide eyes. The arrogant monster who had spent a decade breaking down my self-esteem was completely gone. In his place stood a pathetic, broken criminal facing absolute federal ruin. I leaned in incredibly close, ensuring the microphone on my lapel captured every single syllable for the official corporate record. "You always said I was too clumsy with numbers, Donovan. But it turns out I am good at tracking the $4 million you hid in the Caymans." I let my words hang in the freezing air of the VIP boardroom. Donovan's knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles bone-white, desperately trying to keep himself from collapsing onto the plush carpet. The chief executive officer, Mr. Carmichael, sat completely still, his eyes darting between the massive screenshots of the incriminating text messages and the pathetic, trembling man who had tried to steal from him. Then the dam broke. Amber let out a high-pitched, hysterical scream. It was not a cry of remorse. It was the shrill sound of a rat trapped in a corner, willing to chew off its own leg to escape. She shoved her rolling leather chair backward so violently that it crashed into the wood-paneled wall. "He made me do it," Amber shrieked, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at Donovan's chest. The entire board watched in morbid fascination as the devoted secretary instantly morphed into a rabid accuser. "I had no idea what was in that black zip bag. He packed it. He told me it was just highly classified corporate documents that he needed to keep away from his crazy wife. I didn't know. There were synthetic narcotics in there. I didn't know he was stealing. He forced me to carry it through the airport checkpoint." Donovan's head snapped toward his mistress. The shock on his face was almost comical. The woman he had risked his entire career and marriage for was tossing him straight into the federal incinerator without a second thought. "You lying piece of trash!" Donovan roared, his voice cracking with panic. He lunged toward her but stopped dead as two senior executives stood up, abruptly blocking his path. "You knew exactly what was in that bag. You demanded 20% of the cut. You said you'd frame Rebecca yourself if I didn't have the stomach for it." Amber burst into theatrical tears, turning her frantic, pleading gaze toward the head of the table. "Mr. Carmichael, you have to believe me. I'm just an administrative assistant. Donovan is the vice president. He threatened to fire me and ruin my career if I didn't help him hide his personal assets from his divorce. He manipulated me. He's a monster." Mr. Carmichael did not blink. He looked at Amber with the kind of cold, clinical disgust usually reserved for scraping something foul off the bottom of an expensive shoe. I remained at the podium watching them tear each other apart. It was a spectacular display of toxic self-preservation. Donovan, realizing Amber was successfully casting herself as his victim, spun back toward me. His eyes were wild, unhinged. "Rebecca, tell them," Donovan pleaded, his voice dropping into a pathetic, desperate whine. "Tell them she's lying. You know how manipulative she is. She seduced me. She orchestrated this whole thing to steal from my company. I was just trying to protect our family." I looked at the man I had spent 5 years serving. The man who had called me clumsy, who had called me a burden, who had planned to let me rot in a Mexican prison. Now he was begging the burden to save his life. I tapped the spacebar on my laptop. The giant projection screen shifted. The text messages vanished, replaced by an audio waveform graphic. The crisp, clear sound of Amber's voice from the previous night, captured through Donovan's cloned smartwatch connection, blasted through the boardroom speakers. "I want my cut, Donovan. I want my money right now, or I am going straight to the board tomorrow morning and telling them exactly where the missing company funds went." The audio clip continued, perfectly capturing Amber's vicious, demanding tone, entirely shattering her fragile victim routine. "I risked federal trafficking charges for you. I smuggled that bag through security because you said it was safer with me. Figure it out or I burn you to the ground." I paused the audio. The silence in the room was absolute. Amber stood frozen against the wall. The theatrical tears instantly dried up. The realization that I had recorded her private treasonous demands washed over her face, leaving her looking hollowed out and completely defeated. She slowly sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, her arrogant facade utterly destroyed by the undeniable proof of her own greed. Donovan let out a strangled, breathless sound. He looked around the massive mahogany table. 15 top-tier executives stared back at him with pure, unadulterated contempt. There was no escape. The narrative he had meticulously crafted, the brilliant executive plagued by a clumsy criminal wife, was dead and buried. Mr. Carmichael finally spoke. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Donovan," Mr. Carmichael said, steepling his fingers, "you have not only embezzled $4 million from this real estate investment trust, but you have also attempted to use corporate emergency funds to bail a co-conspirator out of a federal trafficking charge. You then stood in this room and attempted to frame a highly respected crisis management consultant who happens to be your wife for your own staggering incompetence." Mr. Carmichael stood up, towering over the end of the table. "You are terminated effective immediately, and you will not be leaving this resort." Donovan's knees finally gave out. He collapsed into his leather chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. The invincible vice president had been reduced to a sobbing, pathetic mess. I closed my laptop. My job here was done. I had executed the corporate mandate with flawless precision, but the personal reckoning was not yet complete. I began unplugging my equipment, ready to leave them to the federal authorities. Before I could secure my cables, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom violently crashed open. The two security guards outside were shoved aside by sheer aggressive force. Brenda stormed into the room, her face flushed dark red with frantic, entitled outrage. Gordon followed closely behind her, his fists clenched, while Trevor pushed past the guards, his chest puffed out, ready for a brawl. Hotel staff hovered nervously in the hallway. They had clearly tipped off the family that Donovan was trapped in an escalating disaster. "What on earth do you think you are doing?" Brenda shrieked, her voice shattering the stunned silence of the boardroom. She marched right past the chief executive officer, without a single glance of respect, her eyes locked entirely on me. "We were told you ambushed my son. You vindictive, jealous little girl. I knew you would not leave quietly. I knew you would try to drag his pristine reputation through the mud, just because you cannot handle being cast aside for a superior woman." Gordon stepped up beside her, pointing a thick, trembling finger at my face. "Get away from that podium right now, Rebecca. You are trespassing. You are embarrassing this family for the absolute last time." Trevor, smelling blood in the water, aggressively shoved past one of the stunned senior executives to reach the front of the room. He positioned his massive frame directly between me and the projector screen, crossing his muscular arms, trying to physically intimidate me into submission. "Turn that machine off." Trevor barked, his face contorted with unhinged misogyny. You are pathetic. You cannot handle the fact that Donovan outgrew you, so you come in here and try to destroy his career with your fake little freelance spreadsheets. Step away from the computer before I make you step away. I did not take a single step backward. I looked at the three of them standing there fiercely defending a man who was currently slumped in his leather executive chair, weeping uncontrollably into his hands. They were so blinded by their own toxic devotion to their golden child that they could not even read the room. They did not notice the 15 elite executives staring at them with absolute unadulterated horror. They did not notice Amber sobbing on the carpet in the corner, fully broken. Mr. Carmichael stood up, his towering presence demanding immediate compliance. "Security, remove these people from my boardroom," he commanded, his voice cold as glacial ice. "Wait," I interjected, holding up my hand with absolute authority. I looked directly at the chief executive officer. "With your permission, Mr. Carmichael, I think the family should stay. They have a massive vested interest in the corporate findings I am about to present. In fact, they are the primary financial stakeholders in Donovan's latest offshore ventures." Mr. Carmichael narrowed his eyes, studying my confident posture, then gave a sharp single nod. The security guards paused at the doorway, blocking the exit, but leaving the family trapped inside. I turned my attention back to my aggressively posturing brother-in-law. I stepped smoothly around Trevor, completely ignoring his pathetic attempt to block my path, and rested my hand on my encrypted laptop keyboard. "I am not destroying your husband's career, Brenda," I said, my voice echoing with terrifying razor-sharp calm across the mahogany table. "I am simply documenting the spectacular destruction he caused himself. And more importantly, the irreversible destruction he just caused you." I hit the spacebar. The massive projection screen behind Trevor flashed bright white. The text messages and offshore banking logs vanished in an instant. In their place, a high-resolution scan of a highly classified legal contract materialized. The bold black letters at the very top of the document read, "Primary Residential Mortgage Agreement." Right below it was the exact home address of Brenda and Gordon's sprawling multi-million-dollar retirement estate. Gordon squinted at the massive screen, his aggressive posture faltering immediately. "What is this garbage? Why is my home address up there on that board?" I looked at my father-in-law, offering him absolutely no sympathy whatsoever. "You spent the last decade telling me I was a financial parasite, Gordon. You loudly claimed I leached off your son's hard-earned money while contributing nothing. But your golden child did not earn his money. He stole it. And before he could steal from this real estate investment trust, he needed massive initial capital to open his offshore accounts and set up his elaborate laundering network." I tapped the keyboard again, zooming in on the signature line at the very bottom of the document. Two perfectly forged signatures sat on the digital ink line: Brenda and Gordon. "Donovan did not just empty his own checking accounts," I stated, ensuring my voice carried cleanly to the back of the silent room. "He secretly remortgaged your entire retirement estate. He meticulously forged both of your signatures to secure a high-risk predatory loan to cover his initial losses in the market. He took every single penny of equity you built over 40 years, funneled it through his dummy corporations, and gambled it away. He burned down your house to keep himself warm. You do not own a retirement estate anymore, Gordon. The bank owns it, and because it is tied directly to federal wire fraud, it will be seized by the government by the end of the week. You are completely bankrupt." The color entirely drained from Brenda's face, leaving her skin a sickening shade of gray. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the forged signatures projected on the massive screen, then slowly turned her head to look at her favorite son. Donovan could not meet her eyes. He kept his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with pathetic, cowardly sobs. The reality of her absolute, irreversible financial ruin crashed down on Brenda all at once. Her eyes rolled back into her head. Her knees buckled instantly and she collapsed backward, fainting dead away into Gordon's arms. Gordon let out a loud, strangled, breathless cry, sinking heavily to the carpeted floor as he struggled to hold his unconscious wife. Trevor stared at his parents on the ground, his face twisting with a mixture of shock and dawning terror. He whipped his head around to stare at the projection screen. As he read the finer print on the laundering documents outlining the path of the stolen retirement funds, his jaw dropped wide open. The network of dummy corporations used to wash the stolen money were clearly listed in bold font. They were his shell companies. The Delaware-based entities, he thought were completely untraceable, were plastered in high definition in front of a room full of furious corporate executives. Trevor stumbled backward, bumping into the mahogany table, realizing he was not just an innocent bystander. He was a documented accomplice to federal embezzlement and elder financial abuse. He spun around, looking desperately toward the boardroom doors for a clear escape route. He stopped dead in his tracks. Standing perfectly still in the heavy oak doorway framed by the utter chaos of the hallway was Jada. She wore a flawless, tailored white suit, her expression radiating absolute icy liberation. She looked down at her husband, who was trembling violently under the crushing weight of his exposed crimes. She did not offer a single ounce of comfort or pity. Instead, she raised her right hand. Clutched tightly in her perfectly manicured fingers was a thick stack of legal documents. They were divorce papers. The sharp wail of approaching sirens sliced through the heavy tension of the boardroom. The distant howling quickly multiplied, bouncing off the pristine stucco walls of the luxury resort and vibrating against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Trevor stared at the divorce papers in Jada's hand, his brain finally processing the terrifying reality that the sirens were coming for him. The arrogant, controlling brother-in-law, who had spent years treating me like an incompetent burden, was now physically shrinking, stepping backward until his spine hit the edge of the mahogany table. Jada did not flinch. She stood in the doorway, a gorgeous pillar of absolute resolve, watching the inevitable destruction of the men who had poisoned her life and mine. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of the boardroom, casting harsh shadows across Donovan's tear-stained face. The sudden burst of color snapped my husband out of his catatonic stupor. His primal survival instincts kicked in, overriding any remaining shred of corporate dignity he possessed. He bolted. He shoved his own weeping father aside, knocking Gordon to the carpeted floor without a second glance. He sprinted toward the secondary exit at the back of the room, panting like a hunted animal. He genuinely thought he could outrun international law enforcement in a tailored linen suit. He did not even make it 5 steps. The heavy oak doors swung open entirely, pushing Jada gently to the side as a highly coordinated strike team breached the room. Federal agents in tactical gear operating in full jurisdiction, alongside heavily armed Mexican authorities, flooded the boardroom. Their badges gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. Donovan let out a pathetic, high-pitched scream as 2 federal agents tackled him mid-stride. The impact drove the breath from his lungs and slammed him violently face first into the expensive carpet. His cheek bounced off the floor, his perfect hair instantly ruined. "Put your hands behind your back," an agent roared, pinning Donovan's arms together with brutal efficiency. The cold metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly, a sound far more final than a judge's gavel. Amber watched her millionaire meal ticket get crushed against the floor. The reality of her own impending federal indictment completely shattered her arrogant facade. She fell to her knees, her inappropriate cocktail dress riding up as she scrambled frantically across the floor toward me. She grabbed the hem of my navy blue blazer, tears streaming down her face, ruining her heavy makeup. "Rebecca, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "You have to tell them I had nothing to do with the money laundering. I was just following orders." Amber begged, clutching my jacket with trembling hands. "He manipulated me. Please, I do not want to go to a foreign prison. I will do anything. Have mercy on me." I looked down at the woman who had intentionally spilled wine on my dress. The woman who had bragged about taking my house, my accounts, and my entire life. I did not step away. I stared directly into her terrified eyes, my expression devoid of a single ounce of pity. "You wanted my husband and my life," I said, my voice echoing with terrifying absolute finality. "You can have the prison sentence that comes with him." Amber collapsed onto her stomach, sobbing hysterically into her hands as a female agent hoisted her up by the arm and locked a pair of steel cuffs around her wrists. The agents were not finished. Another team moved swiftly toward the back of the room, flanking Trevor. He held his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender, his arrogant machismo completely gone. "I did not do anything," Trevor cried out, looking desperately toward his wife for salvation. "Jada, tell them, I am just a consultant." Jada smiled a cold, liberating expression. I told them everything, Trevor, she replied smoothly. Enjoy the consequences of your business model. The agent spun him around, cuffing the aggressive bully and shoving him toward the door alongside his weeping brother. Brenda, who had been unconscious on the floor, suddenly stirred as the chaotic shouting filled the room. She opened her eyes just in time to witness her precious golden child being hauled onto his feet by federal agents. Donovan's nose was bleeding, his linen suit torn and wrinkled. No, Brenda shrieked, scrambling to her knees and reaching out with trembling, desperate hands. Let him go. Hi is a vice president. He is a good boy. You are making a terrible mistake. She clawed at the air, hyperventilating wildly. Gordon tried weakly to hold his wife back, but he possessed no energy to fight the reality of their absolute financial and social ruin. They had lost their retirement estate, their money, and their favorite son, all in one morning. As the agents dragged Donovan violently toward the exit, he twisted his head around his eyes, locking onto me with a mixture of profound hatred and undeniable terror. He thrashed against the officer's grip, spittle flying from his lips. She set me up, Donovan screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing down the marble hallway. She is a criminal. Do not listen to her. She planned all of this. Donovan continued screaming, his boots dragging uselessly against the expensive flooring. I am innocent. His pathetic lies faded as the heavy oak doors swung shut, cutting off the toxic noise of his existence entirely. The boardroom fell completely silent, save for the muffled weeping of my ruined mother-in-law on the floor. I stood at the podium, smoothing my blazer, my posture perfectly straight. The 15 executives at the mahogany table remained frozen, absorbing the spectacular, ruthless execution of corporate justice. They had witnessed a masterclass in crisis management, and the room buzzed with an unspoken, profound level of shock. Mr. Carmichael, the ruthless chief executive officer, stood up from his chair. He walked slowly around the massive mahogany table, completely ignoring the sobbing elderly couple on the carpet. His heavy footsteps were the only sound in the vast, luxurious space. He stopped directly in front of me, his tall frame casting a long shadow. He extended his right hand, his icy eyes conveying an immense, profound level of respect that he rarely showed to anyone. That was an exceptional display of crisis management, Mr. Carmichael stated, his deep voice resonating with genuine gratitude. Thank you for saving this company, Rebecca. I accepted Mr. Carmichael's handshake with a firm professional grip. You are entirely welcome, I replied, my voice steady and professional. I will have my firm send over the finalized crisis management invoice by the end of the business day. I turned my back on the empty mahogany table and walked out of the boardroom. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me, sealing away the corporate graveyard I had just created. The marble corridor outside was swarming with hotel security, frantic resort managers, and the remaining federal agents coordinating the transport of their newly acquired high-profile prisoners. I walked through the chaos with absolute serenity. The air in the resort suddenly felt incredibly crisp and breathable. I made my way down the wide, sweeping staircase that emptied directly into the grand lobby. The scene unfolding at the center of the massive foyer was spectacular. Two federal agents were aggressively marching Trevor toward the main glass exit doors. Trevor was stumbling, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, his face a grotesque mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. Jada walked parallel to the agents, her posture impeccably straight, her heels clicking against the polished stone floor in a sharp, rhythmic cadence. She looked like a runway model strolling past a car crash. Trevor was frantically twisting his neck, desperately trying to lock eyes with his wife. "Jada, please!" Trevor begged, his voice cracking loudly enough for the gathered crowd of wealthy vacationers to hear. "You have to call my attorneys. You have to fix this." I had no idea how deep Donovan was in this mess. He lied to me. He is my brother, Jada. I trusted him and he manipulated my business. I am a victim here. You cannot just walk away from your husband. Jada stopped walking. She stood perfectly still in the center of the lavish lobby, forcing the federal agents to pause for a brief moment. She looked at the man she had been married to for 7 years. There was absolutely no love, no pity, and no hesitation in her dark eyes. She reached into her tailored designer bag and pulled out a thick, bound stack of legal documents. She slapped the divorce papers directly against Trevor's chest. Since his hands were restrained, the heavy packet hit his expensive shirt and fell to the marble floor with a satisfying smack. "I am not walking away," Trevor Jada stated, her tone radiating pure icy execution. "I am running, and you are definitely not a victim." Trevor stared down at the divorce papers resting by his shoes, his jaw dropping open. "Jada, what are you doing? We are a team. We are family." Jada let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through the lobby noise. "We were never a team. I was just another asset you thought you could control." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metallic flash drive, holding it up so it caught the light of the lobby chandeliers. She twirled it between her perfectly manicured fingers. "Do not bother blaming your brother for your own greed. I gave the feds your secondary ledgers, Trevor. Every single hidden account, every fraudulent invoice, every piece of dirty money you washed through Delaware. You are going to need a very good lawyer." Trevor's face drained of all remaining color. The realization that his own wife had delivered the killing blow paralyzed him. The federal agents did not give him time to respond. They shoved him forward, marching him through the automatic glass doors and out into the blazing Mexican sunlight, shoving him roughly into the back of a waiting armored vehicle. Jada stood in the lobby watching the vehicle doors slam shut. She turned around and saw me standing at the base of the grand staircase. The chaos of the resort faded into the background. Across the sprawling marble floor, our eyes met. We did not need to say a single word. We shared a profound, silent look of absolute triumph. We were two women who had been dragged into a system of relentless generational toxicity, expected to smile and carry the heavy burdens of arrogant men. Instead of breaking, we had sharpened ourselves into blades and cut the entire family tree down to its rotten roots. Jada offered me a fierce, victorious smile, raised her hand in a silent salute, and walked gracefully out of the resort to begin her brand new life. I took a deep breath, adjusting my navy blue blazer, ready to head back to my suite and pack my bags. But my path was completely blocked. Sitting on the plush velvet couches in the center of the lobby were Brenda and Gordon, the aggressive, domineering monsters who had spent the last hours screaming at me to leave the property were completely unrecognizable. They looked like deflated balloons. Gordon sat with his head buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, pathetic tears. Brenda was rocking back and forth on the couch cushion, her expensive mascara running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. The reality of their situation had finally crushed them. They had no money. They had no retirement estate. Their bank accounts were frozen. Their credit cards were likely canceled. And their two golden boys were currently sitting in federal custody, facing decades in prison. They had nothing to fall back on now. Brenda looked up through her tear-soaked eyelashes and saw me standing there by the stairs. The older woman who had spent the last 10 years calling me a clumsy, useless parasite suddenly scrambled to her trembling feet. She stumbled forward, her wrinkled hands outstretched in a desperate, groveling gesture. She looked at me not with hatred, but with a sickening, pathetic hunger for salvation. "Rebecca, please wait." Brenda sobbed, her voice trembling with absolute desperation as she rushed toward me. "We made a terrible mistake. You have to help us. Please, Rebecca. You are our only hope now. We apologize." Brenda's desperate plea echoed through the grand lobby, hanging in the air like a foul odor. She grabbed my forearm, her painted fingernails digging into my navy blue blazer. "Rebecca, please, you have to help us. You just said yourself the bank is going to take our house. We have no savings left. Gordon's pension is gone. We'll be on the street." Gordon had managed to pull himself up from the floor, his face pale and slack. He stood behind his weeping wife, his usual arrogant posture replaced by the hunch of a defeated, broken man. He didn't speak, but his eyes mirrored Brenda's frantic desperation. "You're a successful consultant." Brenda sobbed, the tears ruining her heavy makeup, leaving black streaks down her cheeks. "You obviously have money. You can afford to put us up somewhere. Just until we figure this out. We're family, Rebecca. You can't just leave us with nothing." I looked down at her hand, gripping my arm. I didn't shake her off. I simply stared at her fingers until, realizing the absolute hostility radiating from me, she slowly pulled her hand back, her lower lip trembling. "Family." I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to squirm under my gaze. 10 years, Brenda. For 10 years you treated me like a parasitic infection. You told me I was leeching off your son. You mocked my freelance work. You demanded I empty my savings to bail out his mistress. And Gordon. I shifted my eyes to my father-in-law. You stood right there not 30 minutes ago and called me a criminal who disgraced your precious bloodline. We were wrong, Brenda cried, her voice cracking. We didn't know he was stealing. He lied to us. He lied to you because he knew exactly who you were. I countered, my voice dropping to a lethal, chilling whisper. He knew you cared more about the illusion of wealth than actual integrity. He knew as long as he paid for your luxury vacations and country club memberships, you'd never ask where the money came from. You didn't raise a successful executive, Brenda. You raised a monster, and you fed his ego until he devoured you. But we have nothing. Gordon finally rasped, his voice sounding thin and weak. You can't just walk away. You have a moral obligation. I have zero obligations to people who actively plotted my destruction. I said, my tone absolute ice. You sat back and cheered while Donovan handed me divorce papers that would have left me destitute. You applauded Amber when she told you I was going to federal prison. You wanted me ruined. You celebrated it. I took a step closer, forcing Brenda to back away. You spent a decade calling me a burden, I stated, locking eyes with her. It's time you learned to carry your own weight. I turned my back on them. The lobby was entirely silent save for Brenda's wretched, pathetic sobbing. I didn't look back as I walked through the automatic glass doors and out into the blazing Mexican sunlight. The heat washed over me, burning away the last lingering shadows of my toxic marriage. A private car, arranged by my firm, was already waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door and I slid into the cool leather interior. As the car pulled away, heading toward the airport, I felt an immense, overwhelming sense of liberation. I had severed the diseased limb and the healing could finally begin. 3 months later, the crisp autumn wind whipped through the canyons of Manhattan. I stepped out of a black SUV, the sounds of the city, a stark contrast to the humid stillness of Cancun. I adjusted my designer trench coat, the fabric heavy and luxurious against the chill. Above me towered a sleek glass and steel skyscraper, the corporate headquarters of my crisis management firm. The lobby bustled with the frantic energy of high-stakes finance, but I moved through the crowd with an easy, practiced grace. I flashed my ID badge at the security turnstile, the green light granting me access to the executive elevators. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, checking the notification. It was a secure message from my attorney. Sale of marital asset finalized. Funds transferred. You are officially untethered. I smiled, dropping the phone back into my pocket. The house Donovan had so proudly claimed as his own, the one he tried to force me out of, had been sold, the proceeds neatly deposited into my heavily encrypted accounts. I stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. The doors slid shut, sealing me in a quiet hum as the cab rocketed upward. I was no longer the clumsy, submissive wife. I was no longer the freelance consultant hiding in the shadows. I was the woman who had brought down a multi-million-dollar embezzlement ring, dismantled a toxic family structure, and secured her own absolute financial independence. The elevator chimed, the doors opening to reveal the sprawling, sunlit expanse of my firm's executive suite. I stepped out, ready to claim the life I had meticulously built. The transition from the executive suite to the federal courthouse took exactly 7 months. Building a new life was remarkably easy once the financial and emotional anchors of my previous existence were permanently severed. Walking into the towering federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan felt entirely different from any corporate boardroom I had ever commanded. The polished marble floors echoed with the heavy weight of impending justice, a stark contrast to the tropical breeze of the resort where this nightmare finally imploded. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit, feeling the satisfying absence of the heavy wedding band that used to drag my left hand down. The courtroom was packed. Financial scandals involving high-profile real estate investment trusts always drew a crowd of hungry journalists and curious spectators. I walked down the center aisle, keeping my posture perfectly straight, my eyes fixed forward. The heavy wooden double doors closed behind me with a resounding thud, sealing the room. Donovan sat at the defense table. The sight of him nearly made me pause, not out of pity, but out of sheer clinical fascination. The arrogant vice president, who had worn custom Italian linen and ordered $1,000 bottles of wine, was entirely gone. In his place sat a hollow broken shell of a man, swallowed up by an oversized bright orange prison jumpsuit. His perfectly styled hair had grown out thin and greasy. His skin held a sickly pale hue, deprived of the luxury resort sun. He kept his head bowed, his shoulders slumped inward as if trying to fold himself into a space small enough to disappear. Amber sat at the adjacent defense table, separated from her former lover by a physical divide of federal marshals. She looked worse. The glamorous entitled secretary, who had intentionally ruined my white silk dress, was trembling visibly. Her dark roots had grown out several inches, framing a face devoid of the heavy, expensive makeup she used to mask her vicious personality. The federal prosecutor called me to the witness stand. I walked up the steps, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the absolute truth. The truth was the only weapon I needed. As I sat in the wooden witness chair, I looked directly at Donovan. He finally raised his head, his bloodshot eyes meeting mine. He looked utterly terrified. The prosecution projected the digital evidence onto the courtroom screens. My testimony was not an emotional performance. It was a flawless surgical execution of facts. I detailed the offshore routing numbers, the forged signatures on Brenda and Gordon's retirement estate, and the meticulously planned airport setup. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I simply presented the reality of Donovan's staggering greed. When the prosecutor played the audio recording of Donovan planning to frame me to his corporate board, the jury visibly recoiled. I watched the jurors look from the screen to Donovan with absolute unadulterated disgust. The defense attorneys tried to cross-examine me, attempting to paint me as a scorned, vengeful wife who fabricated the digital trail to ruin her cheating husband. I dismantled their arguments with chilling precision, citing network access logs and biometric firewall data. I pointed out that Donovan's own digital fingerprint was permanently embedded in every single illegal transaction. By the time I stepped down from the witness stand, Donovan's highly paid defense team looked entirely defeated. Amber was given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing. She practically crawled to the podium, weeping hysterically into a crumpled tissue. She tried to deploy the exact same manipulative victim routine she had attempted in the resort boardroom. "Your Honor, I was manipulated," Amber sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly through the microphone. I am just a young woman who made a terrible mistake. He was my boss. He threatened my career. I did not know the extent of the money laundering. I was scared for my life. Please, I am begging for leniency. I am not a criminal." The federal judge, a stern man with zero tolerance for white-collar fraud, peered over his reading glasses. He was completely unmoved by her theatrical display. "Miss," the judge stated, his voice resonating with heavy authority, "the evidence presented in this court, including your own recorded demands for a percentage of the stolen capital, thoroughly contradicts your statement. You were not a coerced victim. You were a willing, enthusiastic co-conspirator. You actively facilitated international drug smuggling to frame an innocent woman. Your tears do not erase your extreme culpability." Amber collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands as her defense attorney awkwardly patted her shoulder. The judge turned his attention to Donovan. The courtroom grew deadly silent. Donovan stood up, his legs shaking so violently that the federal marshal had to step closer to steady him. "This court has reviewed the overwhelming mountain of evidence," the judge announced. "The sheer scale of your financial crimes is staggering. You embezzled $4 million, forged legal documents to defraud your own parents out of their life savings, and orchestrated a malicious, highly coordinated plot to send your wife to a foreign prison. Your arrogance is only matched by your profound lack of basic human decency." Donovan squeezed his eyes shut, a fresh wave of tears leaking down his pale cheeks. "Donovan, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy," the judge declared, striking the gavel. "Amber, for your active role in this conspiracy and international trafficking, you are sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary." A collective exhale swept through the gallery. But the judge was not finished. He looked down at a secondary stack of papers on his bench. "Furthermore, Federal indictments were officially handed down this morning for your brother Trevor. He is currently being arraigned in a separate courtroom for multiple counts of sophisticated money laundering and corporate fraud. Donovan slumped forward, his hands gripping the defense table to keep from hitting the floor. His entire family legacy, the toxic empire built on greed, entitlement, and the exploitation of others, had been completely eradicated. The federal marshals immediately moved in, grabbing Donovan by the upper arms and hauling him aggressively toward the heavy side doors that led back to the holding cells. As the marshals dragged him away, Donovan twisted his head around. He searched the crowded gallery frantically until his bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. He looked at me with a pathetic, hollow desperation, silently pleading for a single ounce of the empathy I had given him for 5 years. He wanted me to show anger, sadness, or even victorious gloating. He wanted to know he still mattered even as a villain. I sat perfectly still in the second row. I did not smile. I did not glare. I looked at the man who had tried to destroy my existence with the cold, detached indifference one reserves for a stranger passing on the street. Then in one fluid motion I turned my back to him. I faced the courtroom exit, picked up my designer bag, and erased him from my life forever. I stepped out, ready to claim the life I meticulously built. The executive floor of the crisis management firm hummed with focused energy. Analysts parted ways as I walked down the corridor. They did not see the clumsy dependent wife my former husband projected onto the world. They saw the apex predator who salvaged a billion-dollar real estate trust from a catastrophic scandal. I reached the glass doors of the corner office. David stood by the window overlooking Manhattan. He turned around, a folder resting on his desk. "You executed the Carmichael account with flawless precision," Rebecca David said, his voice carrying professional reverence. Not a single cent of shareholder capital was lost, and the public relations fallout was mitigated before the media caught wind. I took a seat opposite his desk. "I isolated the toxic assets and removed them from the equation," I replied smoothly. "It is exactly what you hired me to do." David smiled, tapping the folder. "We hired a senior consultant, but after your performance in Cancun, the equity partners held a unanimous vote." He slid the folder across the wood. "We are offering you a full equity stake. Welcome to the senior partnership." I opened the folder, scanning the proof of my hard-earned ascension. I pulled a silver pen from my pocket, signed my name, and pushed the contract back. I spent a decade shrinking myself to fit a mold designed by insecure men and their enabling parents. I would never shrink again. I left the firm an hour later, stepping out into the crisp evening air. I hailed a town car, directing the driver to a rooftop lounge 40 stories above the garment district. The venue was a sanctuary of modern luxury bathed in warm amber light and jazz. I spotted her immediately. Jada sat at a corner booth, looking breathtaking in an emerald green suit. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant crown, radiating the profound power that only comes from true liberation. She stood up, greeting me with a fierce embrace. "Look at the new senior partner," Jada said, inspecting my trench coat with a proud smile. "You are the terror of Wall Street right now." "And look at the founder of the city's most requested independent logistics firm," I countered, taking my seat. "I heard you secured the contract for the new downtown commercial development." Jada picked up her crystal flute of champagne. "I did. When you are not managing a toxic husband and his criminal shell companies, you have free time to build your empire." We clinked our glasses together. We drank to intelligence, strategic patience, and the absolute destruction of every person who underestimated our worth. "Have you heard anything from the remnants of the family?" I asked. Jada let out a dry, dark laugh. "It is a spectacular tragedy. Trevor is sitting in a federal holding facility in Brooklyn. He is looking at 10 years minimum for money laundering. He had the audacity to call me from the detention center last week, begging for money on his commissary account." "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him my financial portfolio was strictly reserved for productive members of society," Jada replied, her eyes flashing with cold amusement. Then I hung up and blocked the incoming number. "He can learn to barter with instant noodles." I smiled, savoring the poetic justice. "And Brenda and Gordon?" Jada shook her head. "They lost the retirement estate to the bank last month. The federal asset forfeiture wiped out their remaining accounts. They are renting a cramped apartment in a decaying New Jersey suburb. Gordon is working as a greeter at a hardware store, and Brenda is clerking at a discount retail shop. The woman who bragged about her country club status is now folding clearance sweaters for minimum wage. They tried asking for a character reference for Trevor's sentencing hearing. I sent them a copy of my finalized divorce decree instead. They built a shrine to their arrogance, I said, staring out at the skyline. They locked themselves inside before they burned it to the ground. We spent the next 2 hours discussing our new contracts and the profound peace of living completely for ourselves. There were no manipulative men demanding we shrink our ambitions. There were no hostile in-laws questioning our contributions. There was only the limitless horizon of our potential. As the night deepened, Jada excused herself to take a call from a prospective international client. I remained at the corner booth looking out over the illuminated grid of Manhattan. The city felt alive, pulsing with unbridled energy. The cold wind brushed against my face, carrying the scent of autumn and absolute freedom. My phone vibrated softly in my designer bag. I pulled it out and tapped the glowing screen. It was a text message from my attorney. The final escrow documents have cleared. The sale of the marital home is officially closed. The funds have been wired to your primary independent account. You are untethered. Congratulations, Rebecca. I read the words 3 times, letting the reality wash over every nerve ending in my body. The house where Donovan repeatedly called me a clumsy burden was gone. The physical structure that represented a decade of psychological conditioning and financial manipulation had been liquidated into pure usable capital. He was sitting in a federal penitentiary, wearing an orange jumpsuit, stripped of his wealth, his reputation, and his freedom. I was sitting on top of the world, holding the key to my empire. I dropped the phone back into my designer bag and let out a long, slow breath. The invisible I had carried for 10 grueling years completely evaporated into the night air. I picked up my crystal flute, a genuine radiant smile breaking across my face. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive champagne, savoring the crisp, immaculate taste of sweet vengeance. The burden was finally lifted, and my new dawn had arrived. True power does not come from screaming back at those who belittle you. It is forged in the quiet, relentless pursuit of your own independence. When toxic family members try to mold you into their designated scapegoat, remember that their cruelty is a reflection of their own deep-seated insecurities, not your actual worth. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you, and sometimes walking away is the ultimate victory. By building your own empire and securing your total financial freedom, you completely strip them of their leverage. Your success and unbreakable boundaries remain your sweetest revenge. If you have ever walked away from a toxic family to protect your peace, share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe for more empowering journeys.